From London, and welcome to this webinar on embedding the gains of the pandemic response. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former civil servant here in the United Kingdom, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this webinar today on behalf of the Global Government Forum that works with civil servants all across the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner for today, Civica. It's with their support that we're able to put on events like this at no cost to civil servants and public servants. So today, the topic of the webinar is embedding the gains of the pandemic response. And governments around the world are often criticised for not being able to move quickly, for not working well jointly across departments. But actually what we've seen during the pandemic is lots of governments breaking that stereotype. And whether it's in terms of getting kind of approval for a vaccine, being able to roll out the vaccine quickly, bringing in legislation at pace to back up some of the restrictions that are needed during the pandemic, improving joint working between departments and professions, we've really seen quite a lot of things that aren't traditionally seen from civil servants and governments. So the question today really is, has all of that been beneficial? Have there been some downsides to that? Has it come at the cost, for example, maybe of due process not being followed, of increased risks? And which of those lessons learned, both good and bad, can we make sure that we take forward and sustain in the future? Now, we've got a fantastic panel with us today. We've got 5 brilliant panel members, and I'm going to introduce each of those panel members in a moment and ask them to give an opening presentation. But we will have time after the panel have spoken to take questions from all of you, the audience. So please you should have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. At any point throughout the presentations, you can message in some questions that you might have, and then time allowing at the end, we will take as many of those questions as possible. But now to our fantastic panel. First up, we will hear from Raj Thupal, who is Chief Technology Officer, Shared Services for Canada, where his responsibilities include transformative technologies and advancing digital enablement. Previously, Raj has led work in Canada on cybersecurity, data networks, and digital services. Then we'll hear from Julie Pearce, who is Director of Openness, Data and Digital at the Food Standards Agency in Wales in the United Kingdom. Previously, Julie was the CIO at DEFRA, and she spent much of her earlier career in the private sector implementing change programs and also as a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Then we'll hear from Mark Humphreys, who is Head of Analytics Consultancies with our knowledge partner Civica, where he supports organisations to develop effective data strategies that ultimately lead to better business outcomes. Mark is also chair of DAMA UK, which is a community for data management professionals. Then we'll head to Finland to hear from Vesa Leponen, who has worked in several government departments in Finland and is currently Chief Information Officer in the Finnish Ministry of Finance. His work history covers strategy, development and financing in the field of digitalisation of government services. And last but not least, we'll hear from Matthew Rees. Matthew Rees is the Commercial Hub Director at the National Audit Office here in the United Kingdom, and he's got a wide range of private and public sector experience in accounting, corporate finance, competition policy and economic regulation. So we've got different perspectives there from the regulator, from private sector and from central government in various countries around the world. So fantastic panel. Please do send in your questions. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Raj to give us the first presentation.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm very glad to be here, presenting to all of you the work that we have done in Canada and where we are going after this one. I'm joining you from Ottawa. It's very cold here today. I'm sure many of you are having a much pleasant weather than where we are, but happy to be here and talking about the maintaining the pace theme today. If you can go to the next slide. For those of you that don't know us, Shared Services Canada is a IT infrastructure organization within Canadian federal government. We provide services to 43 plus big departments and agencies, providing networks, telecommunications, data centers, email and other collaboration tools, So our primary mandate is to serve about 400,000 public service employees and the force members in providing services in about 4,000 buildings across Canada and internationally. And before COVID, I used to say that our networks would reach 4,000 buildings, and that's what our primary focus is. And now I talk about 400,000 buildings. Those are the homes of people where we serve them today with various tools, including collaboration tools, telephony, and other applications that are required to work from anywhere and anytime. So that was a big demand when about a year back when COVID hit. We had to quickly turn around and provide these services from people's homes. And we increased our remote access capacity by 104%, as you can see here. So right now, most of the federal employees can connect from home and work on most of the things that they were working on before COVID hit. The other thing that was very important for us to provide was the collaboration tools. So we had plans to implement collaboration tools prior to the COVID, but what we planned to implement over a period of 3 to 5 years, we were able to do it in 3 to 5 months. That was a significant shift in how we worked, the risks that we took, how we funded the programs, how we worked with our partners, both in private sector and within the government context. And that was a eye opener for many on what we could do when actually when time comes to actually implement stuff without going through the normal processes that we have, which do have their own benefits. But I think it's finding the right balance between getting things done to getting things done with all the rules and regulations and all the governance that we have. There has also been significant increase in the number of new applications that we needed to support for various social programs and other benefits that we had to release. So we supported a lot of our departments in migrating to cloud, implementing new applications in a rapid time, which is unprecedented to before, to unprecedented ever from where we are now. What we have seen is working as an enterprise from a government context, leveraging from one department's, one agency's lessons, and having resources shared when things become really problematic helped us quite a bit. And one of the questions we're asking now is, why can't we do it as a normal? Why can't we get into a mode where we are sharing the common practices, common approaches, and even resources when needed, when a particular department doesn't have the capacity? Also working with the private sector, who instead of treating them as vendors, but instead treating them as partners, and ensuring that we have that relationship to actually scale when we have to scale. And that was a very important lesson that we learned as we were implementing the services. So the bottom line here is it's all about people. The people that you have in your teams, the departments or the customers that you serve, and the stakeholders that you have that work with you are really, really important for us to transform and do things differently when time comes to rise above what we normally do. And that's what we learned. And I think going forward, that's something that we need to emphasize more on the importance of people and the relationships to get things done. If you can go to the next slide. Some of the other things that we have to shift from how we approach things. We traditionally within the government context are very, very planning focused. So we plan everything. We have a lot of people and documentation to do proper project management, to meet all the governance requirements, and to meet all the policies required to manage it. But then the risk of doing that in when we had to respond to COVID was significantly higher than not actually delivering things and taking risks to fail. So we had failed on a few things, but overall we succeeded quite a bit in delivering the capabilities to our customers rather than focusing on the traditional way of approaching things. So the cost of inaction was much more higher than cost of action. So we launched on it. We made sure that everybody is aware. We communicated that quite well. We managed the risk. The governance was typically once every 2 weeks. We met twice every day during the peak time. with all the right people to ensure that everybody was aware we are getting into things with our eyes wide open. And then if we had to change our approach, we were able to quickly change. So we had a lot of support from many central agencies within Canada to be able to do that. Uh, However, the biggest impact I would say is on our people. We demanded quite a bit from them, and they delivered on all of that. However, to continue on that scale going forward is not practical, and it led to many. It would lead to many issues long term. So we once we hit a threshold, we started asking people to take breaks, asked people to take rotations, and also reduce the governance a bit because it was getting too much that we couldn't sustain that pace over a period of time. So right now we are not back to where we were. However, we are still having the weekly once governance, sometimes ad hoc meetings instead of waiting for a governance meeting to kick in, to be able to progress stuff rather than waiting for things to happen. I think my next slide summarizes some of these approaches. I think taking a principles-based approach while meeting the policy and regulation requirements, at the same time having our eye on the outcomes is very, very important. Also, in a shared services environment, we see the taking common approaches and common platforms accelerates many departments, because not everybody needs to learn everything. We can learn from each other's mistakes or successes and leverage that to move forward. Procurement is a big one. We can't use traditional approaches to procurement. We need to partner with our vendors and call them and build those partnerships, and then see how we still can remain transparent and open and fair to the vendor community. So that's something that we need to work on. We're not there yet. I think that's an area that requires attention. Also, the funding model, typically we do go through the budget process, we go through the submissions to access funding. And for the pace of change that we have right now, it would take a long time to get access to the funding. So we need to look at the different funding model to keep continuing with the pace that we have. I touched quite a bit on the partnerships. Last but not the least is the people. We need to be conscious of the demands that we put on our staff, and the change management that people needs to go through, both from people that are implementing stuff, people that are delivering stuff, but also for the end users who are going through a lot in their personal lives, and demanding them to change how they work while they are all concerned about what's happening out in the world and their personal lives. We need to be conscious about that. So we emphasize quite a bit on mental health, worked a lot with our support systems to make sure that everybody has access to the tools they need to be healthy, both mentally and physically. And that was a very, very important thing. And going forward, as we are still in the middle of the crisis, it's very important for people to place a lot of attention on mental health, and ensuring that we support our teams and our customers in ensuring they are sound and healthy. I think with that, I'll stop here and turn it back to you, Siobhan.
Thanks so much, Raj. That's a brilliant way to start. A really good overview there of some of the things that you did quickly. I like the idea of something that you would have done in 3 to 5 years, you had to do in 3 to 5 months. The sense of your kind of user base going from those 4,000 buildings to 400,000 people working from home now, your own staff, and how do you accommodate that? And I really like what you said there at the end about, although a benefit is learning to work at pace, you really have to be mindful of what that does to the individuals and to the staff, and looking after people's well-being, hugely important in terms of going forward and how we can sustain some of these new ways of working. Thanks so much, Raj. I'm going to hand over to Julie to give her presentation.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Just to manage expectations, I have no slides, so I'm just going to be talking to you. So I'm Julie Pearce from the UK Food Standards Agency, and we are the regulator responsible for ensuring that the food that we eat is safe and it is what it says it is. So we've been playing a key role through COVID-19, ensuring food isn't impacted by COVID-19, and also ensuring it's still available for everybody to eat. And so in answer to the question posed, what are the things I would like to take away and carry forward in a post-pandemic world? And I'm drawing out a couple of things here. First, collaboration, and second, agility. And I think they've been mentioned by Raj. But those two combined with a real razor sharp focus on outcomes. Maybe that's something that we should do, but often don't, because we sometimes get a little forgetful as to why we're doing stuff. But that focus on outcomes is being visible all the way through. I'd also like to say, I think our focus on the risk is also being played through, and the risk conversations we've had have been much more real. They've been much more relevant. They've been really balancing one risk against another, and we've had proper conversations. Whereas I probably shouldn't say this in front of my NAO colleague, but sometimes risk can be something that sort of happens over there and it sits in a risk register but isn't relevant. But I think the conversations we've been having have played risk in, and I think that's been really, really important. So I'm just going to go through a few examples where I've seen that sort of collaboration being enacted, and particularly collaboration in relation to data sharing, because that's one of my areas of great interest. The first example is across UK government departments. Anyone who has to work with the UK government will know how siloed we can be. But seeing big departments like Department of Work and Pensions and the National Health Service and others sharing information to try to generate lists of people who might have problems accessing food, that's been a real focused with a very clear objective, and people may be surprised as to how hard that was, but it was hard to get those lists to then to reach out to make sure those people were being fed. The FSA itself provided data to the Treasury about food businesses for the Eat Out to Help Out programme, and again the response when Treasury effectively rang us to say, have you got any data? And within a day we're generating the data that they need. So that ability to break down those silos, the whether it be process or it be technology or it be data or it be the people who are willing to make it happen. My next example is looking at cross-government and cross-industry. So this is cross the food industry, and the example I have here is the Food Resilience Industry Forum. So that is a group of people representing over 100 organisations, government, trade organisations, businesses that used to meet every day. It's dropped down now to about twice a week, but they used to meet every morning to share concerns that they had related to COVID-19 and whether or not it would have impact on the availability of food. So they're worrying about food manufacture and processing, they're worrying about imports and whether ferries would run, whether hauliers were able to run. Not only did they all get together every day and have a big conversation, they also generated a series of task and finish working groups. Often they'd be industry led that would grab an issue, whether it's development of track and trace or it's improving testing within food businesses, or whether it's communication with consumers around safe behaviour. Seeing so much of that being done between government and industry, and again, an example where you could make things happen within a matter of weeks rather than years, with people taking their positions and maybe maintaining a bit of a standoff. So that was really refreshing. And That group continues to meet because the pandemic carries on, but also has agreed to increase its scope to think about EU exit. So again, that group can see the power that they have and wanted to maintain that energy going forward. And I hope that they will continue to do so. My third example is government and scientists and citizens. And again, having spent decades trying to get everybody to engage with, enthuse about data, see the value of data and generate use from it, I'm really strangely gratified to see people who are not data experts start to see and understand and value the data that they're being presented with every day. Whether it's the number of COVID-19 cases, whether it's the R value, or whether it's vaccine efficacy, people are becoming quite proficient in understanding what those numbers, what those graphs are actually telling them. But they needed to get the context. They needed to see the relevance of that data and what they were being shown. They needed to see their role and what their actions, what impact their actions, whether good or bad, might have on all of that data. That being able to see that impact being played back to them in the data, I think, was really powerful. So looking forward, how to maintain that engagement, that interest in data, that enthusiasm, but also apply it in other areas, possibly net zero, but that's what I'd love to see.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julie. And thanks. I'm conscious everyone's really keeping to time, so thank you so much. So really good examples there, the stepping up in terms of sharing data across government departments and how helpful that was in things like getting food out to people that needed it very quickly. I really like what you were saying, the example about government working better with the private sector and crossing sectors, crossing different industries, and that task and finish, how important that was and how quickly that could be done during the pandemic. And then looking forward, how we apply these lessons to other things. And you mentioned there climate change zero, but also you mentioned, dare I say it, the Brexit word, the B word. So all of those things could be helpful going forward as well. Thank you so much. I'm now going to ask Mark to give his presentation.
Thank you, Siobhan. Okay, so my name is Mark Humphreys. I'm the head of BI and Analytics Consulting at Civica, as Siobhan introduced me earlier. I'm also the chairman of Dharma UK, so I'm here with two hats on today. A quick word about Dharma UK. So Dharma UK exists to promote best practice in data management generally, and we support a network of data management professionals across the UK. We have a couple of really important assets, which if you're interested in data management, I really encourage you to look into. One is the Data Management Body of Knowledge, the DMBOK, and the other is the CDMP, Certified Data Management Professional exam. Both, again, looking to promote best practice in data management. Next slide, please. So in terms of Civica, so for those of you who don't know Civica, we work primarily with the public sector, primarily a software company, but I work in the consulting group, and my area of interest is very much BI and analytics, and I spend a lot of my time working with our customers, helping them to move their BI and analytics to the cloud, but also to unlock the potential of end user self-serve BI and analytics. So the idea that instead of all reports and all data being under the control of a central team of experts, actually democratizing it, if you like, and actually putting data and putting the tools in the hands of end users, the people who've got questions, basically. So rather than asking for a new report and waiting 6 weeks to get the answer, by which time the world has moved on, actually anyone who has a question, who needs to understand things, decision makers, whatever, does actually have access both to the data and the tools to get the answers they want. And I think that's a very, very relevant point at the moment. So next slide, please. Full Fact put out a report, interestingly, one of my go-to sources for looking for truth in the world these days. They put out a good report recently, Fighting a Pandemic Needs Good Information. I think that neatly sums up the theme of today. It makes 10 recommendations. None of those recommendations will be a surprise to people who are already working in data management. But it does focus quite a bit on the negative things that could be done better. I think, you know, almost unfairly, it glosses over some of the remarkable things that we've seen over the last year in terms of working with data and getting answers to some very urgent questions. There are, you know, it's been a very dynamic situation. From week to week, the situation changes as infection rates go up and down, as new variants of the virus come, you know, you can't become known, as vaccines are developed and so on, and vaccines are rolled out. So each week there's been a different question. If we think back to, you know, right at the beginning, one of the things that you know, needed to be, one of the things where data was very important at an earlier stage was identifying those people who were vulnerable and needed shielding. And I attended a very interesting webinar a couple of months ago from the team that put that together, how they compiled the vulnerable people list. And there were some great data stories in there, including some interesting data quality examples. So one of the data quality examples they found in there where they had was when they discovered that the list included pregnant men, so they had to remove those. But you know, that's just a simple anecdote, but it showed the importance of things like data quality and so on. But I've been, you know, time and time again, I've been impressed with the speed at which the data community in particular and data professionals have come together to produce the answers to very urgent questions. As well as that, there's been some excellent communication using data, using good high quality data visualization techniques to explain what's going on to decision makers, to the general public and so on. And as a result of that, and I think in previous speakers have touched on this, we've actually seen an increase in data literacy. And who would have thought a year ago that log scale charts would now be mainstream in order to understand exponential growth and exponential decay. Or even, you know, things like understanding of the difference between false positives and false negatives, and how you know, it's important to understand those to actually come to realistic conclusions. So I think that there's been an awful lot of good news, and I'd like to just dive into an example that you know, that is familiar to me, because it's one of Civica's customers. Next slide, please. So as the pandemic broke, one of our largest customers we were working with was the MOD, and in particular DE&S, Defence Equipment and Support. And we were working with them to establish data governance practices and data quality practices and so on. And one of the things we were doing at the time was rolling out data quality controls, and the idea of evaluating data sets and promoting the idea of data which had been through assessment, had been you know, data quality controls have been run, thresholds have been defined, and so on. And got to the point where, you know, a data set could be effectively rubber stamped as being trusted. And they talked about, in the MOD, they talked about kite marks, effectively the kite mark for trusted data. And as the pandemic broke, one of the things that we'd been working on quite recently at the time actually was personnel data. And this became very relevant because one of the things that the MOD needed to put together very rapidly was a risk assessment in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that would affect operational capability. So I think if you remember, there was a case in the US Navy where the nuclear aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt was actually taken out of action for 7 weeks because of a COVID outbreak, which affected 1,000 sailors who tested positive, and sadly one died. But you know, this was a major operational unit for the US military, which was completely taken out of action for 7 weeks. So one of the things the MOD had to do was, you know, a similar kind of risk assessment is what was the link between personnel and skills and operational units and so on, to produce a risk assessment plan where they could identify the risks and as a result put in a mitigation plan in place so that PPE was issued to the most important, you know, where the risk was highest, but also reporting so that as people became sick, that was reported, and the impact on operational capability was known. Yeah, so you know, and this was so the data, the work that we've been doing, and the quality of personnel data was extremely relevant and actually helped the MOD to go further. And as a result, it's given them that sort of that credibility, if you like, to push on and promote data quality. Next slide, please. Okay. Lastly, I would also like to just call out the work that the Government Data Quality Hub have been doing. And this is an initiative that was started by James Tucker at the ONS. I'll give him a quick plug. It's something they've been working with us at Dharma UK for. This is the idea is you've got a reusable framework, but also a community of people sharing notes. And James's vision is that this should be used across government to increase quality, increase understanding of data across the board. So if this is something that interests you, I would strongly recommend reaching out to James at the ONS and the Data Quality Hub. Just Google it, you'll find it. There's a number of web pages and some interesting material available there. So that's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. So that gives us a different perspective, somebody who partners with government on a lot of these issues. And again, I think there is definitely a kind of theme emerging now across lots of the panel members here, the speakers, about the importance of data sharing during the pandemic. But in terms of the impact of that, how that's helped the public maybe to appreciate more the benefits, if we can get that right, maybe that will help improve trust in the use of data, because that's an issue I know for governments and the public in lots of different countries. And also there, an appreciation of the quality of data is really important, because you want to be making the best possible decisions using that data. Interesting what you said about communication, whether it's been good or not. You were saying it's been good. We could maybe come back to that in the discussion afterwards. I think people might have different views on that. So thank you very much, Mark. I'm now going to ask Vesa in Finland to give his presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. Yes, and greetings from Finland, very snowy here today. And I'm just going to go through a couple of examples about how the Finnish government has been handling this pandemic. And well, basically, we have been handling this situation well. We don't have that many infections. We don't have a large outbreak of COVID-19. And our politicians have been capable of making decisions, and then the government has been also, the civil servants have been effective enough to get it done. We have some advantages that has enabled us to do this. And one is what Sebastian just said, is the trust. We have a high level of trust to the public sector, and we are one of the least corrupted countries in the world. So there's a lot of trust in the government, and we are actually one of the happiest taxpayers in the world as well. So we are basically in a good situation to do regulations and new services. They are widely accepted, and we can get our message through. Then we have also a great data coverage. We do have quality registers over the population at normal times, and now we have done lots of real-time data sharing and statistics about the situation in a population level. And almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone has a smartphone or two, so we actually have the infrastructure as well. And a couple of examples about the public sector innovations. Obviously, those are done with the private sector, and we do have both the technology in them, but first one is example of where the companies that have been suffering from the COVID, especially like hotels, restaurants that have been closed for a while, and not many people are coming. There is a huge impact in tourism also. So we had to make a new service that actually can supplement this loss to those companies, and we did put up a business cost support system, and basically it is intended to companies whose turnover has fallen due to coronavirus pandemic and therefore have difficulties dealing with the salary expenses, other expenses in the period where the support is available, and we needed those companies to apply it, and there's lots of applications coming through, and we didn't have the legislation on which basis we would do these things. The service was built with the state treasury, and political decisions was made in April, and legislation come in effect in June. Normally it takes 1 to 2 years to build a technology, regulation, and total new services, and now we only needed 6 weeks. This was possible through doing co-work with the technological and legislation work. They were done side by side. And the project sort of busted myths about public sector, how we're not able to use agile methods, or the legislation comes first, and then after that we can probably get to the action level as well. And the service was also, we didn't set the bar low as we had only little time, but there is also a high demand on digital appliance. So 97% of the applied aid came with digitally. 80% of the applications were handled so that we were using automation or robotics, and average handling time was 77 hours, which is sort of unheard of in coming to new services. And this was done mainly, Raj said it nice, it was taken from the backbone of every civil servant and private sector worker who were doing it. It was done during the evenings and weekends, and weeklies were turned into dailies. So it was sort of amplified process, and of course this can't be always the case, but it is possible, and there are very good examples of how things should be done, and especially the legislation and the technical side seen side by side. The other example I'm talking about is Koronavilkku, which is an application that tells you if you've been in contact with someone who has been tested positive with coronavirus. I think we have this a lot of these kind of applications in Europe and across the world, and it took 3 months. We didn't have the legislation, we did have the technology, and then the difference between, let's say, France or any other country is that we have the trust in public sector, and the trust that our privacy is secured. So within 1 month, over 2 million Finns have been downloaded this application, and it is in use now. What's even better is that it has been done so that it supports interoperability. That actually now you can get an update that gives you the information about similar cases in other countries as well. If they have the application, you can get sort of infection information out of it. And this is something that usually takes a lot of time. In interoperability, we need to use regulations. We do it in the EU level. And now it seems that we can do this agile as well. I think it's a great lesson lesson to learn. And probably well, just telling it at the end, where we do have the digital capabilities that we have in during the COVID and even before. Tax office announced it last year's statistics about how many people actually go into the tax office to take care of the taxes, and it's 1%, and over 90% are doing it online. So basically, we are moving in the country in the situation where digital services have become actually everybody's case, and this accelerates it even more, the situation. Yes, I understand I have only little or no time at this point, so thank you. This was my presentation at this moment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Really good to have those examples. I think the example you gave about having to bring in legislation quickly to provide that support to the hospitality sector shows, like you said, that it can be done really quickly if you can get people to work together differently. Really interesting what you said about the use of technology, the app to tell you if you've been in contact with somebody. It would be fascinating to do a compare and contrast across countries, because in the UK we've had lots of issues with the system that we brought in. So there's something where I think not just within a country but across countries it would have been good if we could have learned a bit more in real time about how people were doing that. And also lots of issues about trust, I think, and how much people trust the government with their data. Really interesting. Matthew, I'm going to come to you last but not least, and the issue of procurement has come up right from the start. Raj mentioned that in his, and I know you're going to touch on that, and somebody's also asked a question about that. And just a reminder to the audience, please do send in some questions now, because this is the final presentation and we've got some time left. Over to you, Matthew. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Well, hello everybody. It's great to be presenting to the GGF today. I'm going to talk a bit about the NAO publications, which look at really the government's response to COVID-19. Before I do that, I mean, second day back at the NAO, I've got plenty of my own studies under my belt, but I've been spending a few years actually a combination of defence procurement regulation for the Single Source Regulations Office, which is non-competitive procurement, and I've also been working with a number of regulators and private companies. But I'm back, so I may be taking credit for other people's reports, but I think it's really helpful. So lots of themes actually that the other presenters have been talking about, particularly around data. But I thought I'd start with the rough sleepers response. I mean, this is one of these examples, perhaps another theme that people have been touching on, about central government initiatives and local delivery, not just agencies, it's also charities, not-for-profit, it's companies. You know, that is an amazing risk in the UK. It's a particular issue in some urban areas, but helping rough sleepers off the street was a massive and real stories of achievement there. I mean, I think the long-term challenge, coming back to embedding the gains, is really how does the UK's housing strategy and social care network survive? Because beyond rough sleepers, we've got huge issues of deprivation. We've got lots of issues that the NAO has also reported on school meals. So there's some real social issues there. Now that's I think for the government a real set of priorities that need further work. But one of the sort of data themes that emerges from this report is actually the real poor quality of data, because there was an estimate of about 4,000 homeless people, but actually 33,000 people were helped through that initiative. One there, you know, and that is quite an achievement across other areas. You know, we've certainly seen the public now being very data literate. I think, you know, as others have mentioned, the public expects to see live data, they expect to see daily data, they expect to see local data. And I feel that, you know, there's a lot more that the NAO can do in this space. I think it's been, you know, really challenging to keep a scorecard. There is a COVID tracker of costs that the NAO's, but it's only updated for a second time. And that fiscal consequence is a massive one. I mean, we've basically published data on £116 billion worth of COVID response spend, 271 billion committed, and then the loans to business, the loans to other organisations of another 89 billion. And included within that spend is a write-off of about £31 billion worth of loans. So that's additional government expenditure that is not going to be responded. So, gains of the pandemic response, I think the real question is, long-term affordability to reset public finance, but that's for the future. There's a couple of other reports before we go on to NEO's response. I mean, I'll sort of wrap them all up. Whether you talk about test and trace, PPE procurement, vaccine preparation, some really positive stories of achievement, but some really worrying signs of organisational failure. There's at least 2 brand new agencies that had to emerge, parallel supply chains, test and trace organisations, a lot of public criticism of the availability of PPE in the early days. And that point that actually John Gregorio mentioned about procurement, how does government procure in a crisis, when there's a global demand on commodities and a specific need for very bespoke responses? I think that's another challenge for the government for the future. That there's a really ambitious green paper on public procurement out for consultation by the government, and that obviously wraps up Brexit, it wraps up COVID, it wraps up a lot of net zero initiatives, social value issues. So lots of things there that go wider than just the COVID response to set the scene for the government sort of strategy. So if I go on to the next slide. I think what I've highlighted with those reports is the fact that the NEOs had to publish 2 studies a month. Now that's slightly sort of NEO focused rather than government response, but actually the ability of the NEO to deliver the kind of insights and advice and recommendations that the public expects, that Parliament expects, is really profound. So one of the things that's really drawn me back into the NEO is this hub strategy, and you see there, a lot of this is about influence, deploying knowledge, and developing our capability. And it's a big challenge for us. We've got there the 6 hubs, and this is about really identifying cross-cutting issues, rather than taking a department and a study and then a bad day in Parliament for the unfortunate civil servant who ends up being criticised. This is about the positive story. This is about what works well. How do you make things improve? How does the NEO, as a really important, influential voice of independent scrutiny, bring some additional value to the table? So I'm really looking forward to people's ideas, and certainly if we've got participants today who've got thoughts on what they would expect a public scrutiny function to be contributing, whether that's in the UK, but particularly internationally, we're really open to ideas now, and we're really keen to hear from people as to what they want from the NEO. Can't promise to respond on everything. We're still going to be a report factory to a very large extent. I think that's inevitable. We've got a big financial audit program as well, but the hub strategy is new. You're seeing sort of fresh thinking, hopefully, that people will appreciate, and I'm really keen to help shape it with the input of the community in forums like this. I'll pause there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matthew. Everybody kept nicely to time. So really good to hear about, how central government has been working with lots of different organisations to get that local delivery right and quickly. The issue in the UK, as you mentioned, about getting rough sleepers housed at the start of the pandemic was a very good example of how that worked well. Also, though, I think, and this picks up on one of the questions that have come in, I think, about how the COVID has exposed some social inequalities and how people have been impacted differently. And the data on that maybe could be used going forward to help develop public policy going forward in a different way. I think that's good. We can come back to that. And then what you've said as well about the role of the NAO itself, I'm sure this is something other countries have been thinking about as well, is that you provide much more real-time reporting and that you have a role in sharing good practice and lessons learned, not just reporting on the things that are not going so well. So you have that added value. So thank you so much to all our panel members. We have got some questions coming in, and I wanted to pick up on One of the things that Matthew said there, and put it back to everyone really on the panel, and I think one of the questions sort of touches on this, which is you mentioned there, Matthew, and other panel members have talked about how unsustainable maybe the response was in terms of pace and the pressure that it was putting on civil servants. But also you mentioned as well how maybe the affordability of the response, you know, we've been throwing a lot of money at a lot of things to get us through this time. So my question to all the panel members is, do you think there is a danger as we emerge from the pandemic and we assess the damage that's been done to the finances, that actually a lot of this good practice is going to be lost, and that departments and people, Raj said it's all about people, that we will all revert back to working in our silos? So is there a real danger that our tighter finances are going to force people to go back to old ways of working, and how can we mitigate against that? I'm going to shake the order up a little bit. Julie, I'm going to come to you first to answer that, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. I think the answer is yes and no, some and not. But I really think it is beholden on us to grab the things that are of value and make sure that we're very clear about them. And there's a very wide range of, I think, of examples from on the people side. Our people are less likely to want to come into expensive offices 5 days a week. So I think that has been broken, as it were, as that is the norm. And what we're planning for is a full spectrum of how people work, how they operate, and all things are now normal. So I think that's something that we will definitely take forward. Then I'm not entirely sure whether to use these words, but in some strange way, the pandemic is a great opportunity as an experiment. So many things have changed across whole populations that should be a time where we look. So in my world, we are seeing reduced non-COVID related deaths. So why is that? And we're doing some work to see whether interventions like eating out less, eating more at home is possibly safer, and washing your hands all the time is probably also having a good impact on foodborne disease. So we're seeing the potential for a reduction of disease. Maybe mask wearing again may see a reduction in other forms of disease. So there may be those individual interventions where it would have been really hard previously to make the case to tell people to do them. We have spent a lot of time trying to tell people to wash your hands and wash your food and cook your food. I think it may be an easier sell now to get those messages across.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Mark, I'm going to ask you, because you work with departments, are you optimistic that in addition to the things Julie was saying about people's behaviours and government nudging people into those, are you optimistic that departments themselves and agencies will keep some of this good practice?
So like Julie, I think I see a risk that as people try to recover some costs and save some money, one of the things they might, they might cut back on the wrong things, or cut back on some of the good practice we've seen over the course of the year. But I think, in terms of what would be an appropriate mitigation strategy, I think, taking one of the great things we've seen over the last year is more and more evidence-based decision making. So, actually using data to answer some of the tricky questions, and instead of rushing straight in with gut feel, actually, what would be the right decision, and maybe doing a little bit of experimentation. I'm trying different things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and again seeking evidence. And I think that for me is the way of defending all the good work that's been done in terms of using data and growing that data maturity, improving data literacy. Actually continuing that and saying, okay, we need to recover some money. There's, we spent a lot of money on the pandemic. How can we do that intelligently? What savings work? So where are we wasting money, for example, and reduce that wastage? But where do we get actually a really good return on our money? you know, and you know, money that's invested that you get a return on is never wasted. However, you know, there's lots of evidence. One of the best uses I find of using data intelligence in day-to-day in any department is understanding where you're wasting your efforts.
Yeah, thanks. Vesa, I'm going to come to you now. Raj, the same question. Do you think, you talked about governments working very quickly together, government departments speeding up their practices. Raj at the start, for example, said that they'd done some things and failed, but that was okay because it was better to do things fast than not do things. Do you think going forward, as budgets get tight, departments are kind of fighting for their spending allocation, do you think there'll still be that kind of leeway, that flexibility to maybe try things and fail, or will people start to act in the old ways, more risk averse?
Maybe Shaban, I'll go.
Sorry, Raj, I'm going to let Vesa answer first, then I'll come
right.
to you. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I think there is always a risk of going back to silos, going back to old ways. But I'm kind of optimistic about this thing because it seems that people are saying that the sort of walls of the silos have come down because everybody is remote. It doesn't matter which department you're on. It doesn't matter what floor you work in your department. It's easier sort of start collaborating. And then there is the thing that if you only have limited resources, there is the way that you do by yourself, but you do very little. And when everybody has limited resources, you can do better if you just combine your capabilities and resources. So there is a possibility that it would lead to a better way of working. And sort of like now we do have this sort of problem that we have all this common enemy, and then we have sort of too much resources, or how to say. So there is a speed blindness coming through. It doesn't cost anything because it took $1 million to do that, and so on. But I think this will come to an end and sort of normalize, and we'll see. I hope it's going to be better. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Vesa. So Raj, picking up on what you said there, so Vesa said, you know, some of the walls have come down. People are used to sharing resources. You mentioned that at the beginning, but are you optimistic that we can carry on doing that going forward?
Oh, thanks, Shaban. I fully agree with what Vesa said at the end. I was going to say the same thing. I think the walls have come down, but I think it's up to us now to keep the walls down and work together. I think I'm optimistic that things won't go back to where it was before COVID, but it requires some dedicated action from the top to ensure that the policy aspects are looked at, enterprise approaches are taken into consideration when we do things, what I mean by enterprise is pan-government, cross-departmental approaches, but it requires changes in policy because depending on how the government is structured, if it is a Westminster type government, it's all department by department. So I mean those discussions need to happen, and then I think we can move forward in a different direction, but with a different outcome. When we all work together, I completely agree with what Vesa said. I think together we are stronger. Individually, we all struggle. I think going forward, that should be the mode of operation.
Yeah, thanks. Matthew, and I promise I won't come to you next again.
No, that's fine. Well, look, it's great to hear everybody's responses on that. I mean, I've seen some really great collaborative working, you know, through the time I've been outside the NEO, actually getting involved in working groups. So behind the scenes, I think convening power of the Treasury, in particular around the government balance sheet review, was a very, very proactive experience. Not a COVID issue, but I think it goes on. Actually, you know, I think one of those kind of initiatives that the NEO is looking for with the hubs is to use its own convening power to promote best practice as well. Although sometimes, you know, as you kind of expect, there's a bit of nervousness or anxiety about the context in which myself or one of my colleagues is involved in these sort of processes. I guess the sort of theme that perhaps is the elephant in the room here is the conflict between digital and people. You know, I've spent a bit of time building up data analytics services, the people, processes, and the digital services, when they work in harmony, you can empower a few people to do a huge amount. But when you find, sort of resistance to change, that can put barriers in the way. So I think there's still the traditional issues around how do you get better efficiency and better process will still be there. I think that those are silos that exist within organizations. And that's, I think, where progress needs to sort of be. We need to see the exemplars. We need to see who's doing that really well at any level: local, national, regional, international.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for 2 questions if we keep the answers fairly concise. So the first one I want to ask is come back to the issue of procurement, because this is something I think several of you touched upon. And I think there's recognition that governments have had to move fast. In some cases that's been very good, in other cases that has caused problems and it hasn't maybe been done as well as people would have liked. The question we had in from a member of the audience was, how can you do procurement at pace and still make sure that the right checks and balances are in place and that you get the results that you really want? Vesa, I'm going to come to you because I think there was an issue, wasn't there, in Finland at the start of the pandemic, maybe with the procurement of some, which we had here as well in the UK, with the procurement of some PPE equipment. Is that something you're able to go into a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Not in that great detail, but yes, we did have some issues about it was about the face masks and how much do we need them, and is it enough for healthcare and other people. So we made a couple of hasty decisions. And after that, it seemed that, yes, you can take risks, but you shouldn't take risks with due process. So this is basically the sort of lesson learned from here. And the question was great, but it's very hard to answer it. You have to do it fast. You maybe can do some agile ideas about how to get vendors or suppliers to talk, but you can't just decide and buy it from somewhere else and forget about the procurement and the legislation.
Thanks, Vesa. Matthew, I'm going to come straight to you on this because
yeah, no, thanks very much. I mean, so there was a report that the NEO has done onto this, procurement during crisis, and it links to the government's green paper on procurement with a reform in the UK. I mean, I think there's some real kind of theory versus practice issues that have come up there. I think we all want to have these solid principles of transparency and fairness and even treatment of suppliers, effective markets, good transparency on pricing. So those are the long-term investments to make. I've invested the last few years looking at that for the MOD, and I think we've got some really reliable benchmarks. But when a crisis hits, I think needs must, and I think we could probably look forward to a study on the portfolio approach to vaccines as perhaps a way to improve things, and perhaps some lessons learned on the stock and the quality and the age of the resilience of stock, and sort of what's in the warehouse, so that we don't find ourselves in this situation where public confidence suffers, public finances suffers, and accusations of unfair treatment or priority treatment abound. I think it's vital that we get ourselves back to a level keel on all of these things.
Yeah, so that's raising issues, obviously, of kind of planning in advance and whether we had the right kind of planning done in advance. But Raj, you mentioned as well, procurement was an issue that you don't think you've yet got entirely right. Do you want to expand on that a tiny bit?
I think one of the issues we have is we apply the same method of procurement for everything that we buy, and I think that's one of the challenges. I think tailoring procurement for the need. Sometimes we need to be very specific. Sometimes we need to be going towards an outcomes-based procurement. We can't apply the same principles of a defense procurement to a IT procurement. Yeah. So I think that's the issue we have. Definitely transparency, fairness, and value for money is high. At the same time, there is a risk of delaying things. If it takes 3 to 4 years to procure a cybersecurity system to fix the vulnerabilities, it's not going to be, there is a high risk of exposure.
Yeah.
So I think we need to apply different methods for different problems. And I think in government, that's very difficult to do, given the policies are all tailored, generic rather than specific. So I think there is some work that is required to what Matthew was saying, some reforms to move away from one size fits all to tailored approaches to different problems will certainly help.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I've not heard it put like that before. So hopefully that will be some of the learning that's come out of this as well. Mark, you sit slightly outside the government, obviously working with, is this something, have you got thoughts on procurement and how you see it being done and how it could be done better?
Yeah, like I say, I'm on the other side. I'm busy selling to government rather than but no, in terms of but you know, we also work with organisations like DNS who are one of the biggest purchasers of for everything from aircraft carriers to socks. And I think what's key. A couple of things I'd say is there's different things you're procuring. So that there's things which are very stable, long burn. There's things which change, and then the pandemic has been buying new things at pace and learning as you go. And I think in that environment, it's establishing a learning culture. It's absolutely critical. So what works, what doesn't, and when you discover something isn't working, okay, stop it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Stop what doesn't work. Carry on with what is working, and that's part of the whole agile mentality, and it applies to lots of different things in an environment of change.
Yeah, thank you. Julie, as well, you mentioned the working with industry and how you saw them as partners rather than kind of vendors. And what are your thoughts on what you've learned during this period and whether we'll keep it going forward?
Yes, and our work with industry isn't a procurement one. We're not buying or selling, it's as the regulator. I think and the conversations we have with industry are more around whether sharing information or working together, whether it relates to food safety, and then it's pre-competitive. So it's understanding that sort of competition law and understanding industry generally and the power of different players, and also doing that looking globally. So there are other industries which are fundamentally global in their nature. So again, that's a sort of another dimension of that sort of collaboration. Really, is being able to work across nations.
Thank you. Well, it's been such a good conversation. We're almost out of time, so we've only got time for one more question. And I'm going to actually combine, I think, a couple of questions that have come in all around data and trust. And I know, Vesi, you said there's a high level of trust in Finland. So I guess my final question, your final thoughts on this is, you've all talked about how a better appreciation of data has been a good thing coming out of the pandemic. In terms of the public seeing how beneficial that can be. Do you think data is now going to be used in a different way, potentially to develop new policies, looking maybe at social inequality, for example? That could be one thing. But also, how do we improve the public's trust in the use of data? And maybe, Vesi, you might want to give some reflections on why you've got such high trust in Finland, whereas maybe that's not necessarily the case across all countries. So your thoughts on data going forward. I'm going to start with Mark on this one.
This is something I'm very optimistic about, actually. I think there has been a step change in the level of data literacy. So I think it's people who are dodging the questions, not using the evidence, ignoring the evidence, presenting misinformation, have been called out. And I think that's a really good thing. So I think the expectation is higher. The people I talk to, and I have a privileged position as chairman of Dharma. I talk to a lot of people in data management, and I really get the feeling that there is realized real progress in the last few years and data is getting better, and people have been able to enrich it with metadata. So everything that's being learned about data sets as people are working with them is being captured, and that's been taken forward, and that makes a real difference. And that, I think, is ratcheting up. So I see a ratcheting, if you like, in terms of trust in data at the moment, and I'm optimistic for the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Raj, are you similarly optimistic about data and trust?
Yeah, certainly. I think with the lessons learned that we have, sharing data and trusting different people in this case and organizations significantly helps us to move forward. And I'm quite optimistic with the lessons learned from the last year will help us move in the right direction.
Thank you. I'm just going to add to for the last three panel members, somebody's added in trust is a big issue for the kind of vaccine rollout. So I'll just add that in as we're thinking about the last one. Matthew, data and trust.
Yes, well, I think I'm optimistic. I think obviously there's a kind of the hygiene factor is the data quality, and I think that's something which various people have mentioned is really vital. But I think the key change here is where politicians are demonstrably evidence-led. That is really helpful. I think civil servants, public officials, companies generally are data-led and evidence-led. But I think once this becomes, an open debate with proper evidence, then the data is important. So optimistic as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Besa, obviously you've already got the high levels of trust, but what are your thoughts on data? Is that going to be even more after this period?
I don't know. It depends how we are acting, because I think we should hold on to European or Western values that we could probably done better controlling the virus, but we need to remember the privacy protection, and we don't use facial recognition without consent, and these sort of things that we actually ask the people and tell them how we are going to use the information, and then we can use it. And there is, like many others have said, there is better data literacy, and there is sort of high trust in this if we are worth it. If we are not, then it's gone. And it's very hard to build again.
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of that comes back to that, like you say, communication as well. People understand how it's being used. They're more open to giving it over, and privacy is a key thing, especially in Western countries, as you say. Julie, I'm going to give you the last word, thoughts on data and trust in data.
Yes, exactly. I think the positive is that we've established the interest and the conversation with people about data and about trust and about quality, but also what does it mean, so I've rarely come across a situation where it is very simply it's good quality or bad quality. If only it was that straightforward. It's what is this data trying to do? What is it actually trying to measure? What does it tell me? What might I do with it, with the insights that I've got? So that in itself is a big topic, and I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation. But I'm hoping that if there is any pushback with people saying, oh, the data's not good, or I don't trust the data, we can continue to reach out to people and have the conversation and explain and take people with us, because I think the direction of travel through ever increasing amounts of data, through conversations about AI, through those bias conversations and what's it doing to me, I think those are super critical, but we need to get people coming with us.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Well, I do know if people are interested in carrying on that conversation, there will be, I think, a webinar later this month on data management and what that means, so people can carry on that conversation if they want to look on the events page and register for that one as well. I would just like to say a huge thank you to such a wonderful panel for giving us your time. I think we managed to get through nearly all of the questions there. So thanks to Vesa, to Matthew, to Raj, to Mark and to Julie. A really interesting discussion there. We will be sending round a link of this conversation, so if people missed a bit of it, or if they want to watch it all over again, they can do, and there will also be a write-up with some of the key information, the key points that were raised being sent out to people. I'd like to thank Civica again for being the knowledge partner today. Really good to end on that optimistic note that I think there will be lots of positives coming out of what has been a very difficult time, and hopefully we have learnt lessons from some of the things that maybe we didn't do as well as we would have liked to do with hindsight, but that's a nice positive note to end on. Wherever you are, if it's snowing, enjoy the rest of the day, and hopefully we will see you again soon on another webinar. So from me, thank you to everyone and have a lovely rest of the day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.